Good evening and welcome back to Tactics Board. Today we're previewing a huge game between Norwich City and Sheffield United in the Championship on Saturday. Obviously, both teams hoping to get promotion to the Premier League. The home side, obviously via the playoffs. A little bit too late for them now to make an automatic run because Sheffield United and Burnley have pulled so far away from the pack, or they had at one stage. And I think Sheffield United are probably still quite big favourites to get into the Premier League next season, but they have dropped a few points over the last few weeks, and maybe the form that took them to where they are now has slowed a little bit. So I think it comes at a time when Norwich certainly can pick up points and maybe even get a win if they play to the absolute best of their abilities and maybe get a little bit of luck along the way as well. David Wagner's tactical setup will need to be absolutely spot on. So that's what we're going to take a look at today, how he might line up his team and just talk about some of the aspects going into the game that we're expecting to unfold. And it should be a really interesting one. I think the fact that Norwich went to Sheffield United and went 2-0 up, and as much as they couldn't hold on to that, that was more of a mentality issue than a technical or tactical issue. So they have shown so far this season that they can go toe-to-toe with teams at this level, perhaps not on a particularly regular basis, but when they've come up against these exact players, they've done well. And I think that will provide them with some encouragement in a game where they certainly will go in as underdogs. And I'll show you the team I think Norwich will go for, or David Wagner will go for. It's quite a difficult one because that tactical setup at Stoke was so different to what they've done before. And as much as it was mildly successful with a 0-0 draw, I don't think they can afford to set up with Max Aarons as a right winger, for example, for the rest of the season. So this is what I've gone with. Angus Gunn in goal, Max Aarons at right back, Grant Hanley and Ben Gibson at centre back, Dimitris Yunoulis at left back, Jakob Sorensen and Kenny McLean in the midfield, with Gabriel Sara on one side, Christos Tzolis on the left, and Tamer Pukki and Josh Sargent up front. So we'll start at the back, and there's no choice other than Angus Gunn, really. He's gone away on international duty, got 2 clean sheets, including in a famous victory over Spain. He'll be really pleased with that and probably full of confidence. And after the fantastic season he's had with Norwich so far, absolutely no option to drop him for this huge game. Moving on to Max Aarons, it comes down once again to a lack of alternatives. And as much as I think Aarons has improved his performance slightly since David Wagner's arrival, it's difficult to say that he's been the player that he has been perhaps a few years ago when the biggest clubs in the world were taking a look at him. And he'll hope to get back up to that form. But for now, I think he's mainly in the team because he suits Wagner's tactical setup, which, to be fair to him, is a virtue. And also the lack of alternatives with Sam Byram struggling with injury, Ballymumba out on loan, and not many other alternatives for that right back position. But I think Aarons is nailed on for this game and probably for the rest of the season, to be honest. Grant Hanley and Ben Gibson at centre back, they had been receiving some criticism over recent games, and that's absolutely fair. Teams have been targeting them, and even Stoke targeted them in possession and pressed them very well, but they managed to get a clean sheet in the Potteries, and Wagner was very complimentary of his defence. So I'd be surprised if he changes it based on how pleased he was with their performance. And I expect to see Grant Hanley and Ben Gibson at centre-back once more. Dimitris Yunoulis at left-back. I think he will be in there after his performance at Stoke. I thought he was fine. I think over the last few weeks, probably fine has summed up where he's been, to be honest. And I think he does have another level and he can perform better than he did in that Stoke game and in recent weeks. But I think there are a few misconceptions around him. A lot of people think he can't defend. I saw a stat the other day that said I think he makes 2.8 tackles per game, which is in the sort of top 5 in the Championship. So as much as that, stats in isolation can be misleading, and I'm not saying he's the best defender, I think there maybe are some unfair misconceptions around where the weaknesses in his game are and quite how poor he is in certain areas, because he certainly can defend and he can make those tackles. So I expect to see him in there, much like Aarons suits the tactical setup very well. And as much as Sam McCallum has provided competition, he's been the only real other competition. But I think you do have to take McCallum seriously, where in the right back position, there's not too many options while Sam Byram is out injured. I think he's been pushing Yunoulis the whole way, and hopefully that's going to pick up his performance levels. I've got Jakob Sorensen and Kenny McLean in midfield, and I think this is where I found it most difficult to predict, because Sorensen obviously played in a right back position against Stoke with Max Aarons pushed forward in a right wing position, and it would feel strange to reward him for a good performance in that game with a position in midfield, but I'm not sure quite what else you do. We've seen in other games at Millwall, specifically, Wagner went with that 2 in midfield, with Sarah slightly further forward because, well, in my view, it's because Norwich maybe needed to be a little bit more solid going away to a club that are certainly in the Championship playoff fight. And I think against a club like Sheffield United, who have been another level above even Millwall, Wagner will look for that solidity somewhere. So I expect to see Sorensen start in the midfield. I don't expect to see him at right back unless Norwich really are going to go negative for the rest of the season, which I wouldn't expect. So that's the midfield I've gone with. Kenny McLean is an absolute dead cert really under Wagner, and he's been probably the best or up and in the conversation for the best player since Wagner's arrived. And we put out a Twitter poll a few days ago asking people who's your player of the season so far, and we got loads of Kenny McLean responses. So I think that tells you, especially for somebody who hasn't always been a fan favourite, quite how good he's been this season. So I think he's absolutely, if not first, second name on the team sheet, and I expect to see him playing. And then I've got Gabriel Sara in a right wing role, and this probably is my riskiest prediction. Of course, he won't be in a traditional getting past the fullback and crossing it role. He would like to drift in, but I don't see with the wide options that Norwich have, and Wagner may reveal some good news in his press conference tomorrow, but there aren't many options for him to put players in that position. And I think Sara is one who he definitely wants in there. And without putting Josh Sargent out wide, which he hasn't tended to do. So there's a few elements at play here. I think he'll want to fill that position with somebody like Gabriel Sara who can be slightly creative. And then on the other side, you've got Christos Tzolis, who I think can play a big role, played that lovely pass for Sargent when he should have scored early on in that Stoke game, but it wasn't really a fair game to judge him on. I know he didn't do huge amounts at the Bet365 stadium, but I think he has shown he's got something to prove. I asked Wagner about it after the Huddersfield game. He obviously scored that goal against Birmingham, and Wagner says he does have something to offer, but it's just been the competition in that area. And now that that's removed, certainly before Wagner's press conference, that's what it looks like. I think we will see him perhaps play a bigger role, and hopefully he can prove himself against Sheffield United on Saturday. And then up front, I've gone with Teemu Pukki and Josh Sargent as a 2. I think Pukki's one of the first names on the team sheet again. He hasn't scored for a while. I don't think he's scored since January, actually. So that is a little bit of a worry. You'd like to see him pick that up and get back on the score sheet. But the work rate that he gets through, the way that he moves defenders round, I think is enough to keep him in the team. And in Wagner's most successful Huddersfield team, it was actually Nahki Wells who didn't score a huge amount of goals, who was the key focal point up front, and he would drag defenders around and allow the wingers to come in and score a lot of goals, the attacking midfielders. I think Pukki can play that role in this team. And then with Josh Sargent, he's a player Wagner likes, as Dean Smith did. I know probably Norwich fans won't be keen for me to draw too many similarities and comparisons between those two, but he's a player who managers like because of the work rate and because of the pressing ability and the physicality, and he gives Norwich another option where under Daniel Farke, they would have played this positive attacking philosophy that David Wagner likes in terms of liking being on the ball and liking making things happen. But it was all, it was very good. I'm not criticising this at all, but it was all built around doing one specific thing, and that was finding Pukki in the box in space, and he finishes. I think with Sargent, they've got a different option, and Wagner probably likes that. So I expect to see those two start up front, and that's the team I'm predicting for the game on Saturday. Hopefully Norwich can pick up another valuable 3 points. It will certainly be a difficult one, and I think maybe some Norwich fans would take 1, but with 8 games left of the season, they're already 3 points outside the playoffs. The pressure really is on, and it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out. For more in-depth analysis, Ben Lee, our sort of tactical expert, has done an absolutely excellent piece that you can read now on Pinken.com and the Pinken Plus app, just breaking down the differences between Dean Smith and David Wagner, and that's probably going to make for quite pleasant reading for those Norwich fans who perhaps weren't particularly huge supporters of Smith's style, and I think that's a really good read. And certainly something you should check out. There's loads more of that sort of insight and analysis on the Pinken Plus app and with a Pinken Plus subscription, which you can take out with a 30-day free trial now. Obviously, if you don't like it, you can cancel without ever paying a penny for it after the first 30 days. And yeah, I think that'll be something you'll certainly be interested in if you are a fan of Tactics Board. So thank you very much for joining me, and I look forward to joining you again on Tactics Board. Fingers crossed for another good performance from Norwich on Saturday.